welcome to Procurement Pivots, the podcast for procurement professionals wanting to navigate change successfully and create career success on your own terms. I'm Donna Bowden, procurement career coach and founder of Narrate Your Career.
And I'm Laura Sellers, executive coach for procurement and founder of Coaching for Procurement. And between us, we bring almost 25 years of supporting and working with procurement professionals. And it's fair to say we've navigated many of our own career pivots along the way. And now we're here to help you do the same.
Each episode will share practical strategies, honest conversations, and expert insights to help you confidently tackle the changes and challenges in your procurement career.
Let's get started.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest episode on the Procurement Pivots podcast. How are you today, Laura?
Yep, good, thank you. Recently returned from working away, so if you're watching on YouTube, do not try and look down towards the floor. You'll see all my stuff everywhere, all my workshop stuff. So yes, please don't. I think I've hidden it quite well with the chair. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay, but I was just going to say we're recording this episode a little bit later than usual. So also, if you're watching, don't look at my eye bags because I'm feeling a little bit tired today.
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, we're really excited to be back for another episode. So today is the second part in our series, which is really focused about restructure and change within your organisation. And last week we started to talk about how people can be kind of impacted, particularly when they're affected by redundancy and they're exiting a business. But today we wanted to really focus on those people that are in role and are affected by a restructure, but remaining with the business, but really look at some of the different ways in which that change and that restructure can affect individuals actually in their role.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because I think when we hear the words restructure, redundancies, we think about the outgoing implications of those who do end up leaving the business, either by choice or not by choice. But for me, and especially from the work with teams and having been through it myself in in-house roles, what can be left behind internally following a restructure or change can also have quite wide ripple effects as well. So we really wanted to put a focus on that in an episode in this series, because I don't think this side of it gets talked about as much as the side maybe that we've already discussed, would you say? Or maybe it's just my lens on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And I think often when people are thinking about these restructures, they are picturing the people that are what they perceive to be most affected, the people that have maybe lost their roles as a result of it. But actually, everyone generally is affected, but in very, very different ways. And like you say, I think actually there are these, huge ripple effects for some people, and it can totally change the dynamics and way in which you feel about the work that you do, and sometimes even the way you feel about yourself as well as a result. So yeah, we just thought this would be, a kind of a useful episode for people that are going through change and restructure right now within the organisation. And we're seeing so much more of it, aren't we? Like, this is the new norm, unfortunately. Like, it's happening more and more. And that is probably one of the certainties for most people working in procurement, that it may well happen at some point that you're going to be working in an organisation that is going through some sort of change or transformation or restructure. So yeah, this series really is about breaking down the different ways in which people can be affected, and some of those kind of tools that can help you to kind of to approach that changing situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where should we start today then, Laura?
I think you touched on it quite nicely, where just thinking about those emotions and those feelings and how they impact people. We did touch on this in the last episode. I think we talked about that grieving process, even that it can be like, and I think as well, it's not often we would give it this term, but it's very similar. In when you remain in the business following these changes, there can be an element of either guilt or any emotions, but basically emotions that that the transition has brought about within you, that there's not always space given to those sorts of things. We often hear, I've certainly heard and had messaging heard as well, both when I was working in-house, but also the work I do now, that, okay, we're moving forward now. Let's, move forward positively. And while we do want to get to a state of moving forward positively, there's not always that space given to the other emotions that people might be experiencing as a result of that.
Yeah. I think you're right. There is almost like sometimes almost this kind of approach of we just need to crack on and it is what it is, let's just move on. But actually, sometimes like people have been concerned about this change. Like, sometimes the lead to that change coming can be quite a long period of time as well, can't it? And some people have been sat there for quite some time, kind of anticipating, worrying, about actually what is it going to look like. And sometimes these, the kind of the bigger changes and restructures are announced from a high level perspective, but actually you don't really understand what that looks like in your department, in your function, in your role for you personally, for months down the line. And so actually that can be a really long period of almost feeling like you're in limbo and not really knowing, how is my role going to be affected? Am I safe? Is my role still going to be there? If it is still going to be there, what does it look like? So, sometimes those emotions have also been building over quite a period of time as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point, because when those things do build up over time, they can sometimes manifest themselves in, I guess, deeper rooted ways. And I like what you said earlier about if the changes are happening and coming down right from the top, sometimes it can take a while for it to trickle down to you to know
Yeah,
exactly what that means. And so that uncertainty can go on for so long. And
yeah,
so some people might look to jump ship beforehand because they don't want to deal with the change. Others are
yeah.
just waiting to see what opportunities it might bring, and others are just in a state of feeling lost, and not knowing
Mm,
what's coming. So I think here the point that we're making is around whatever it is you're feeling, whether you find
yeah,
yourself with an opportunity mindset, with feeling lost, with not knowing what that means, is actually just sit with it a bit and to just notice what it is you're feeling, because fear does come up quite a lot. And fear, there can be everyday fear, there can be deep-rooted fear, and just sitting with it and just going, okay, what am I afraid of? Where can I get that reassurance?
yeah,
Is it a case of I just need to hold on? We just need to hold on while until this storm passes. And I do remember as well working in house, before I was doing what I do now, when we were going through, because of course the whispers start, don't they? Before
Mhm.
the messaging actually starts, the whispers start. So that's
Yeah,
always going on, before
yeah,
anything else. And then I do remember some longer standing members of the team actually sharing their experience with others, saying, guys, we've been through this before and it all turned out okay. And
yeah,
there weren't many of them, because,
yeah.
not everybody stays for that amount of time. But I know that I found that incredibly valuable
Mm.
from others who said, actually, we did go through this and we're okay. It'll all work out.
Yeah, because I think that communication piece, certainly from a lot of the conversations that I've had over the years, both since coaching, but also from my recruitment days as well, there are very different degrees of kind of communication
Mm.
during this time. And it is such a sensitive time. And this really is the time where organisations need to be really considered with how they approach the communication of these
Mm.
changes. But in reality, sometimes it's appalling, actually, the way in which people are finding out about these changes. And, I think also, because the very people that should be communicating, often their roles are also affected, and they're kind of, they're affected by their own emotions as well. And so,
Mm.
yeah, this should be the time where sensitivity and empathy comes through from the organisation. But in reality, that isn't what everyone experiences at
No.
all.
No, that's very true. And sometimes, I mean, culture plays a huge part in this, right, in an organization, but sometimes it is also like that those whispers turn into half truths. So
Mm,
it can be really hard to get a handle on it. And where I've seen it done really well is where that honesty comes right from the top. But we might cover some of that in the leader episode that's coming up later in this series. But yeah, I think it's just, back to that point of the communication, those feelings, how you respond to change anyway,
yeah,
is all going to dictate how you feel. So yeah, sit with it and try to, I guess, even honor how you're feeling. Just like, be self-compassionate about however it is you feel, because some people are okay with change.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, and I think the other thing that I would also share around that is be aware of those loops, those spiraling thoughts, because if you have stayed in the organization, it can, even if you've been told that your job's safe, it can still rock your confidence.
totally.
And yeah, and so that uncertainty, even if you have the certainty in your role, the
Yeah.
uncertainty that you may feel could continue for longer. So understand that about yourself and before you try to either paper over it or remedy it.
Yeah. And again, we've spoken about this before, but I think, sharing, recognizing your own feelings is good, but also thinking, who do you have within your own support circle that you can share how you're feeling with? And actually, sometimes, in a restructure or a change, there's going to be other peers that, perhaps it's appropriate to kind of share how you're feeling, but it might not be someone internally. It might be, a previous colleague, a previous boss, a peer, a partner, a friend, a coach, a mentor, etc. But, actually having creating a space, having a space where you can actually then kind of talk about those feelings with someone else. Because sometimes, like when you're in the thick of the emotion, it's very easy for us to say on a call like this today, sit with your emotions and kind of, acknowledge them and digest them. But actually, when you're in the thick of this moment, that can be quite difficult sometimes to
Mm.
process yourself and to know where to start. So, I think sometimes like having that sounding board, someone that gives you a safe space where you can open up about kind of how you're feeling can be really, really helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing how you feel is definitely up there. And it is different for everyone, isn't it? And it is unique. I would also say though as well, be aware of taking on emotions that aren't yours. Um,
Yeah,
because it's very easy to take on the emotions of somebody else, especially if you are a people person. And so when somebody else is feeling a certain way, that can transfer onto others. So just be aware of if you are carrying something, like where's that come from?
yeah.
As well, and also how you're transmitting that to others. So, being a port in a storm. Some
Mm,
people are really good at that. Other people, do submit to panic a bit more. So, yeah, I think it's just, I think for me, what the most important part of this point, when we're saying about recognize how you're feeling, is that give space to it because it
yeah,
isn't the stuff that's talked about as much internally. Like you say, the
yeah,
comms plans can be as watertight as they can be, but it needs to give space for how people feel.
yeah, definitely. And then I think we were kind of saying as well, like sometimes the dynamics can totally change, can't they? The way in which you feel about your role, the way in which you're interacting. Like sometimes the people you're interacting with totally change.
Mm,
Either the relationships change or the actual people themselves are
mm,
changing. Like I think that's a lot of the people I've supported through constant change and restructure, like the things that they say is really difficult. Procurement is all about the relationships, isn't it? And you can then find that your stakeholders are changing really regularly because of these constant changes and transformations and restructures that are happening.
Yeah, and you've made a great point there because actually, when we were talking about change relationships, I was immediately thinking about a restructure's happened. Three people have gone for the same job. One of them got it, and then the other two are left there reporting in, which is a can be a common theme, and that can really impact the dynamics. But you also make a great point there about the stakeholders. I mean, that shifts all the time. for people. So that again brings about uncertainty. But I think again, recognizing dynamics after a significant event of change can, you need to give thought to that too, because again, it isn't really spoken about, but it can massively impact how well a job gets done.
Yeah.
Following these big changes. So when you see that come up with your work, Donna, is the impact more with the stakeholders that you're thinking of there in the relationship dynamics, or is it also with team?
I think I've seen both, to be honest, but I would say, so a lot of the people, when they originally come to me, it's because they're considering a move, and sometimes it is off the back of, oh, there's been all these changes. So I think some of the more impactful kind of changes, where there's been a constant change of leadership is a massive one, actually. And I think, many individuals actually have just found it incredibly difficult that, some of them, in a space of 2, 3, 4 years, they've had like 3, 4, 5 CFOs in that time frame. And it's like, wow, every single CFO is bringing a totally different dynamic to how they want procurement to look and be. And it's just, the goalposts are just constantly shifting. So I think the kind of the leadership dynamic, that's often a big one. And that's often why people are starting to look at a move, because suddenly, it might be they've been really happy in an organisation, and then there's a change of leadership, and suddenly it doesn't feel aligned anymore, or culturally it doesn't feel like the right environment anymore. But that the stakeholder kind of almost, I think it's multifaceted, actually, the stakeholder bit. So sometimes it's the feeling of just constant churn of stakeholders. But then I think it's also like, we know how difficult it can be sometimes to build those relationships with some of those stakeholders, and that influence piece, is massive. And if you've got some quite disgruntled, unhappy stakeholders because of the changes that are affecting them, it can just make that procurement role even harder.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. And you mentioned earlier about that churn of so many different CFOs or key stakeholders, let's call them. Going back to when there are restructures in general, there are some organisations where a restructure is like an every year occurrence. And so they, to become used to change, but also to always feel like you've got that cloud hanging over you is also tough, isn't it? So yeah, I guess as well. So how I was thinking about that, how that ties into the relationship dynamics is just that, I guess, being able to notice what's affecting that dynamic, because again, is it something that's going on with the other person? Is it something that's going on with you? How does that make you feel about dealing with that person? Because sometimes, especially if it's a decision maker that seems key in a restructure decision, you can change how you are with people because you want to protect yourself. If you're afraid of what change is coming down the line, it can really put a barrier up with other people. So like you said, it's multifaceted. There's so many different ways to think about this. So I think for me, that just the tip here, if that's what we want to call it, is just about, again, recognize, trying to separate the person from the feeling or from the action as well. Because, and again, we might come onto this with the leader episode, going through restructures, but sometimes, that decisions about the future of a team and then the person that sits behind the role, that can also get muddied. The waters can get muddied quite a lot.
Yeah. I think, again, we come to this in most episodes, but I think it's like giving yourself the space, isn't it? It's creating the space to actually kind of digest what's going on here, because, in the middle of a restructure, like, it can just feel like there's all this noise and all this stuff happening, and you're in the thick of it. But I think it can just be so helpful to create that space for yourself to actually be able to think about, okay, how is this potentially going to impact me? How is this going to change how I want to approach certain dynamics? How might this change some of the relationships with some of the stakeholders or colleagues? Like, sometimes it's so busy, the day job was already busy, but then suddenly all these changes are happening. So you're trying to learn, what does that mean on top of the day job? And, I think it can be really difficult sometimes, to create that space to even think about what this means. And so I think a lot of people are just going through the motions and kind of riding with it, and maybe they don't have that space to kind of properly digest, what does this mean and how am I choosing to respond to it? And that can make such a difference. But you have to create, like, again, we've said it so many times, like, no one has the time in their diary to just sit and reflect. Like, how lovely would that be? I've got all these gaps in my diary just to stop, pause, think, reflect. But you need to create that time, even in a really chaotic environment, and that might not be long periods, long blocks of time. It might even be just, stepping out at lunchtime and going for a walk around the park, like in your lunch break, just to give yourself a bit of space, or just stepping away from the desk. But I just think, it's such a lot to process, the emotions and the mixed emotions. This is the thing, people experiencing this, it's not the same emotion every day, is it? It comes in waves, and some days it's positive emotions, some days it's really difficult emotions. Like, it's an ever-changing thing. And, like, one comment can trigger you, because your emotions are heightened. So I think it's just even more important at a time like that to kind of think, how are you going to be able to create a bit of space for yourself so that you can just actually allow yourself to acknowledge and think and reflect on this.
Yeah, and I think, when you were talking about the dynamics earlier and things, it's where it's during times like these that a lot of the trust breaks down, because where we think that somebody knows more than we do about what's going on, or a new change comes in, then you just lose all that trust, and because we're attaching the decision to the person who's been put in the role, and so yeah, going back to what you were just saying about taking the space, is just question whether that feeling is attached to the person or the role, or because yeah, we can transfer our resentment onto other people,
Yeah,
based on a decision that's been made. So let's say three people went for the same role, one person got it, and then there's two left there. Do they resent the person? Do they resent the person who put the other one in there? Do they
yeah,
resent the role being there? It's, and I'm using the word resentment because it's one that comes up often, but it might not be resentment. It could be lots of other different things. But yeah, so I think the point here with around the change relationships and dynamics is, again, take that space to think about if the reaction matches the situation and the person. How can we separate and put that line in, and guess create space and put a gap in between the initial reaction and how we respond to it,
yeah,
because this is where the most trust breaks down, and it can take years to recover trust
yeah,
after a
yeah,
restructure.
yeah. I mean, that's such a good point, isn't it? Like, trust can take a long time to build up, but actually it can be lost very, very quickly. And then
Mm,
rebuilding again it can be incredibly difficult. And I'm sure we'll come to this when it comes to the leader kind of episode. But I think really, at the moment we're focusing on the individual, and the individual, you know, focusing on creating that space for themselves. But I think actually, there is a responsibility on the part of the leader, with the team that is remaining, to ensure as a leader that you are creating those spaces for people
mm,
to acknowledge how they're feeling, how it's impacted them, and how, helping them to be able to move forward as positively as possible, but not just assuming, look, this is the new restructure. This is what it now looks like, kind of crack on. There
mm.
needs to be that empathy and the space to allow people to share how they're feeling.
Yeah, completely is so important. So we've covered around those emotions and giving space to it.
Yeah,
We've also covered the dynamics
yeah,
that can appear or change
Yeah,
in those times of transition. What else would we say in terms of when you stay in a role following
yeah.
restructures that
I
we can
think
focus on?
I think when you hear the word restructure, I think often there can be this kind of quite negative connotation actually associated to that. But also, you know, change can present some amazing opportunity as well. And so I think, a restructure can be an opportunity for a reset. It
Mm-hmm.
can be an opportunity for a little bit of a pause, maybe. Just to kind of regroup and then decide how you're going to move forward from it. And in some instances, it can be incredibly positive, like these changes, structural changes, business changes, like they can create careers, really positive career moves for people as well. And so it's kind of, I suppose enabling yourself to recognize that whilst this period may well be extremely challenging and impact on you emotionally, it's trying to understand actually what could some of the positives be as well.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, this is about resourcing yourself, isn't it? It's about finding the things that we can work with
Yeah,
during this time. And, I remember talking about this when we were having an internal restructure and I remember saying to someone in the team, well, with change comes opportunity.
yeah,
And there were no redundancies at this point. It was just restructures that
yeah,
were happening, but it does unsettle people. And you have to look for those elements of change because sometimes there are positives, not always, but like you say, the word restructure can bring negative connotations. But if it's actually putting things in a better place in terms of maybe
yeah,
reporting lines change for the better, it's good to be able to look for those positives. It's not saying that we ignore the bad stuff or the
yeah,
negative stuff. It's just finding the things that are going to keep you going.
yeah. And I think it's just, in today's world, like we said it earlier, but this is the norm in a lot of environments. A lot of businesses are constantly evolving and they're having to evolve because the world is evolving and the
Mm.
procurement landscape certainly is evolving. And lots of that is really positive. There's some really positive stuff happening in the procurement landscape. And because of that, that is going to mean that procurement functions are having to constantly pivot and evolve and change and grow. So I think actually it's taking away your learns about yourself, like um, how you're able to respond to these changes. Because if you are someone that can kind of remain calm and considered, amongst all of this chaos and change, like that is such a valuable skill set in the
Mm.
world that we're in right now. Like, being able to lead through change, like that's, probably one of the most important skills of the future and now. So I think it's kind of, seeing these experiences as learning experiences as well. And kind of each time, it's kind of it's looking at, it's not just the business, but what were your positive kind of learns from that as well?
Mm. Like you say, it's a great leadership skill, isn't it? To be able to
Totally.
remain calm in these moments. And people, like going back to that thing about how emotions transfer between people, is if you're able to show and maintain that sense of calm, you'll be surprised at how that rubs off on others. And therefore, it has that ripple effect. And it is a great leadership skill. And that's what businesses look for, isn't it? You know,
Yeah,
those who deal with it well. And that doesn't mean that if you're not dealing with it well privately, that there is an opportunity for you. It's just a case of being able to harness those skills
yeah,
and have that self-awareness to go, what's going on with me? Just is this a true reflection? What's going on
yeah,
with this person? Are they, learning not to take things personally as well, I think is something that
yeah,
I could have brought up in the relationship dynamic element. But yeah,
yeah,
so I think, we have to look for those small moments, glimmers,
yeah,
I think we've called them before, that can carry us through in these uncertain times, because it is the norm in a lot of places.
Yeah. But I think also kind of having that understanding of yourself, who you are, what you want, the types of environments you want to be in, your values. Like if you've got that kind of that core understanding, I think that can really help you as well to kind of almost navigate that situation and understand, is this an environment that I'm going to choose to remain in? Is it still aligned? Is it still right? Is this still where I want to be or not? So I think, just having that deeper understanding of, who you are essentially and what you most want out of your career, so that you can ascertain, is this the space for me? Because everyone has choice, and you don't have to remain in that environment if it's no longer serving you.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think you have a great point there. And I would always say that any work you do on yourself to understand yourself, like what you want, what you don't want, it's never wasted effort. I think we've said this before, but it's never, ever a wasted effort. That sort of investment of time, of effort, is never a waste of time. It will always serve you. It will always serve you for the future, because the more you understand yourself, the better resource you'll be for the future. And actually, the more you understand yourself, the less impacted you are by other people's actions. To be able to have that element of detachment from what's going on with others. So it's always a very worthwhile exercise.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, so that probably wraps up this episode, doesn't it? So next time we are going to be focusing on the leader's role, I believe.
The leader's role during restructure and change,
the leader's role, and then we're going to conclude by looking at some of those team dynamics and kind of how the team can be impacted as well by this kind of restructure. So we hope, as always, you found this a helpful, useful episode. If you have, please do share with others that you think, particularly if you know of someone that's working in a business that is going through a lot of change, transformation, restructure. Like a lot of people, I think it can feel very isolating when you're experiencing that yourself, and kind of, understanding how to approach it, I think can be really helpful if you kind of hear that at the right time. So if you've enjoyed this and enjoying the podcast, then please do share it with anyone that you think might benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Donna. Great to chat with you again.
And you. See you next time. Take care, everyone.
Take care, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Procurement Pivots. We hope today's episode gave you actionable tips to help you to continue to move forward in your procurement career.
If you enjoyed the conversation, follow our episodes, share them with others, and please support us on our social media channels for others that might be interested to tune in.